Welcome everybody to Fortitech's and the College of Law's ninth, I believe it is, cybersecurity webinar. This is the second to last for the year as well. This year has certainly gone very fast, and we've had an interesting roller coaster of rides over the last 6 or so months with COVID coming in and offices moving out into working from home scenario and the security changes that has brought for everyone's technology. Today we have Matthew C. from WatchGuard joining us to add to the discussion. Howdy, Matt. Hopefully this will be a pretty entertaining one as it looks at email anti-spam and some of the ways we can protect specifically from phishing attacks, which certainly are quite common. I've definitely had a number of clients who have been attacked by phishing attacks in the recent months too, and it's certainly something that accounts for phishing attacks, and specifically loss of credentials account for up to 2/3 of cybersecurity breaches that have been reported. So it's definitely big on the list and one of the things that we should be looking to protect ourselves from. So how have you and the WatchGuard team noticed a change over the last sort of 6 months with COVID? Has there been a big uptick in reporting for malware, specifically zero-day?
Yeah, there has been. It's been pretty interesting. One of the biggest effects we saw about working from home is that the whole paradigm changed. You know, sort of previously we went to an office, it was all secure. Working from home meant we needed somehow to access everything that we needed in the office. So people opened up a lot of remote access and the bad guys were really quick to jump on the fact that, you know, people working from home, they may not be protected as well. So they were quite quick to throw out a lot of spam and trying to get people to click on those phishing links. And of course that means malware. So it has been quite a surge.
No, certainly there's been a bit of an uptick in the malware and the attacks that have gone on of recent. So I guess this is the world we live in. It's probably going to be worse next year, I imagine, as things go through. The value of these is getting up there. I believe the stat that was last reported in the 9th annual cost of cyber survey is $5 trillion to be lost over the next 10 years. So we aren't talking small numbers here. It's certainly a fairly profitable endeavor for a lot of organizations, and very much something that organized crime is in a big way. These aren't your basement hackers anymore. Unfortunately, Mr. Robot is probably wrong in that.
It's definitely a corporate enterprise now, hacking and basically ransomware, those sort of things. Very frightening.
Yeah. Let's kick things off and we'll see how we go today. But today's on email anti-spam. So our cybersecurity monthly tips have gone from security assessments and technology policy, basically setting up the why are we doing things, and also the where are we starting from. And then in April, we looked at passwords and multi-factor authentication, protecting users and how people get onto systems, and looking at the best tools available for password management. We looked in May at protecting data for remote users, which was good timing as COVID kicked off and everyone was working from home, and how to use VPNs and other services such as AuthPoint to be able to get people to work remotely securely. In June, we looked at business continuity and backup, and specifically remembering that when it comes to cloud assets such as Office 365 or G Suite, these are not actually backed up by the providers, and a third-party backup service is imperative to make sure that you are covered, especially from any insider threats. We've had a number of cases where clients have had staff who have periodically deleted email over the months before they've been released from their employment, and subsequently found that they were doing things they shouldn't have been doing. And backups are something that will protect that, especially in Office 365 tenancies where issues like that may happen. In July, we looked at firewalls and next generation AV, and how firewalls have, I guess, over the years become a very layered approach to protection. Certainly something that working with WatchGuard and their multiple layers has been a boon for businesses, and also looking at next generation AV and looking at the products in the endpoint detection and response, and with Panda Antivirus and their suite that WatchGuard are now looking at there, and ways to protect yourself with that. In August, we looked at detecting and tracking events and using what's called SIEM, SIEM, which basically collects all the log data so that in the event of something happening, you have a clear picture of what went on, what data was actually touched, and also what to do about it, whether that be reporting to all of your users what went on and all of your clients, or those specifically whose data was actually breached, and in a little bit more detail there. In September, we looked at patching in the Internet of Things and basically looking that your network isn't just your computers and keeping those patched with Windows patches, but beyond that at devices such as TVs, or in the case of the fish tank thermometer, there are things on your network that you probably don't know about that are an inlet for hackers. In October, we looked at dark web scanning and security awareness training, and that's dark web is basically where your passwords end up and where they're sold, and being able to look at with some visibility into that and see what's going on there. And also security awareness training, where we actually empower staff to be able to make decisions on what to do. Today, we'll be looking at email anti-spam and going a little bit more into what to look for in emails, as well as a little bit of security awareness training you can take away from this. And in December, we will look at incident response and insurance, i.e. what do we do when we've actually been breached. So I'm going to turn my camera off and I'm going to start clicking through, and when we're ready, we'll hand over to Matt. So today's agenda is what is spam, and how to spot a phishing email, and the benefits of spam and DNS filtering. So why are we here? The Australian Cyber Security Centre reports phishing is the most popular way for criminals to obtain information illegally. So this is ordinarily done by email, and we've all seen a phishing email, such as the Netflix one that comes through there. There's certainly a number of different types of emails that they can send, but generally they're trying to look for you to update something, release something, or give in some way their credentials to you. Alternatively, they're looking to download malware to your computer in order to get on there and see what's going on. So in September this year, Australians personally lost $250,000 to phishing scams. And this was basically reported by victims who had come forward. There is certainly a very large amount of unreported losses that go on as well. And this is reported in the millions, if not the billions, that it has cost the Australian economy. So it's certainly a fairly big problem. And as stated at the bottom there, Google blocks an estimated 18 million COVID-19 scam emails a day. That is just COVID-19 scams, and is just a day. So a little bit of stats that's going on. A new phishing attack is attempted every 39 seconds. So that's somebody coming up with a new idea and going out and attacking you. 75% of phishing targets are found through web searches. So they're looking for emails that are online, on your LinkedIn, on Facebook, anywhere they can pretty much grab an email, they're going to grab it and be able to attack you through that. They also buy lists off the dark web, where they can grab hundreds of thousands of emails in one go and give them the ability to attack those lists. So I think one of the pertinent ones there is the bottom left, where there's been a 600% increase in phishing attacks since COVID-19 pandemic and people working from home. This is certainly a growing issue with the way businesses are attacked, but with the COVID-19 pandemic and what's happened with the changes to most people's working relationships, that has certainly accelerated this. So where does it fit in the NIST Cyber Security Framework? We've shown throughout this year's cybersecurity webinars that we use the NIST Cyber Security Framework to be able to look at what we're trying to implement and what it does. And with regards to looking at protecting yourself from phishing attacks, it's basically looking at a risk assessment. Often these tools do their own risk assessment to come up with a score on whether it's a piece of spam or a bulk email or it's malicious. They're doing that through protective technologies and data security layers. And then they've also got detection processes in place that will pull that out. And a lot of them, again, use a number of layers to make sure that they're not just using one particular engine, if you like, to protect you from it, but a number that look at that. So how to spot a phishing email. We've seen these before. I think a lot of people have got them, whether that be from your bank or from Netflix or whoever sent them out. Microsoft ones seem to still be pretty common, but Often they come through from an email address or from somebody you've never really got an email from. I mean, when was the last time you had your bank actually email you versus sending you a letter? It seems to be pretty uncommon, and that's certainly the way they get you, is putting something in front of you from I guess from a source that you wouldn't normally expect, and usually with something that seems to get an immediate reaction. The ones that we've seen come through are the fines from state and territory police. Often, someone's getting a fine for being in another state where they were driving, and you can click on this link to check the picture. We've also seen fake bills from utilities such as power companies and ISPs coming through. The fake Telstra mobile bill certainly seemed to be a popular one in Australia. Postal services scams seem to never go away, and I'm sick of getting ones from the USPS. It's certainly not a service that's common in Australia, but we still get the spam from it. Banks, again, that seems to be one of the most popular ones that are out there. Telecommunication services, we just talked about ISPs, so that's certainly one they have there. And government departments has popped up a bit recently. There's been a number of scams from the Australian Taxation Office where ATO has said you've had a fine or you've been reassessed and have to pay tax, and please click here to check it off and things like that. So they certainly go after people's insecurities to be able to attack them. If anything is ever asking you for your username, your PIN, your password, or other security questions are answered, it is legitimately a phishing attempt. These do not happen. If anyone rings you up for any of these informations, it is a vishing or voice phishing attack, and do not give them. We certainly don't think you should ever hand that information over to anyone, no matter who they say they are. Anything that asks you to enter information on a web page is probably most likely a phishing attack as well, as they often try to send you to a third-party page. It's normally someone's business website that's been compromised, or a domain name that looks sort of interesting and relevant, but a subdomain of another area, like a Microsoft.com for Microsoft, but really it's hosted on their Microsoft.com services as a subdomain under that. Anything that looks for personal information, such as your credit card or bank account or birth dates or things like that, these are things that are usually red flags that pop up. And anything that looks to get a payment request, we've seen ones that have been asking for postage paid on a free iPad and things like that. So don't ever pay anything online unless you're 100% certain of the company you're dealing with. And we actually suggest people ring into these places, find their number online from their website, ring them up directly and talk to a person directly before they're paying. There seems to be a number of corporate cases where business email compromise has led to someone getting an email from someone they assume is internal, and they've ended up paying a bill or transferring money across, and that's often ended up in losses of hundreds, if not millions of dollars. I think the largest one is something silly like 27 million US dollars that were transferred. So this isn't a low-cost problem. It's certainly a fairly big one. So things to watch out for in phishing emails. The big one is the name it displays from. Anyone can change a display name on an email. It's fairly trivial to do. And if you're getting an email from an internal person, but you've not actually looked at the email address as circled on the red in the right there, that's certainly, I guess, an area to be aware of. We've seen people from CEOs to CFOs emailing admin people to pay bills that have sent it from what looks to be them, and it has their name there, but the email address is something completely different. And that's the number one thing that we look out for and tell people to watch for. We've actually started on a number of our clients implementing adding external to the subject bar on an email, so that they can actually realize that it's not being sent from an internal address, and that's helping limit some of these business email compromise scams that are going around. The other one is hovering over any links and emails that send you anywhere to see what pops up, and to see usually that it's some pretty average looking link that is definitely not where you'd expect it to go. If you've got an email from Commonwealth Bank and you hover over it and it says you need to go to weebly.com, we'd suggest that that's definitely a very large red flag, and clicking that is not a particularly good idea. This one is something that has popped up in the past where attackers use generally bad spelling or grammar, but we've seen that improve over time. The reasoning behind the bad spelling and grammar is it tends to target those who aren't particularly smart, and therefore a better target and weeds out very quickly those who aren't going to be fooled by bad spelling and grammar. And also consider the greeting, valued customer. They've not managed to get a name. They've just got a email address or anything similar like that. If they're not able to actually identify you, it's probably likely that they don't actually know who you are. Asking for personal information or urgency. I guess these two things go hand in hand. Anything that's asking for something personal is definitely someone that is suspect. If they're trying to fish for information like your birth date and things like that, it is not likely to be your bank. Your bank already know who you are and they'll identify you through other means. They're not likely to be doing it through your birth date. And urgency, making you do something now, that's definitely the way to get money out of people, and that's definitely a giant red flag as well. So we also think that looking at the signature block at the bottom can give you a bit of an indicator. A lot of people with email systems these days have automatic signatures that place the signature blocks in, and as such, those who may not have a proper signature block or just go with something basic like that. But also keep in mind that these guys are getting smarter, and the quality of the web assets they put into emails, the logos and the layout and things like that is also getting better and better. And the last one, anything with attachments or links. If they're trying to send you somewhere or there's an attachment to open up, be very wary. We certainly think that attachments on emails from people you don't know about are a big red flag, and also anything that's sending you to Office 365 or Dropbox or something like that to download your invoice is definitely a phishing attempt. So what's the point of spam filtering? I guess, why would you put it in place? We've talked about phishing emails, and it's certainly something there that will help with that. It will remove a very large portion of those, but also it helps remove any zero-day threats that may come through from that angle as well. And you can put policy controls in to help manage bulk email and things like that to get extra filtering. And we also believe that it removes a lot of the time that people spend and waste when it comes to sorting email and deleting what may be bulk email that's coming through from that angle. So there's certainly a productivity improvement as well. This is one of the mail filtering products that we use and recommend. And as you can see there, it's fairly easy to track what emails come through and see what's being rejected or what's being identified as spam or infomail/bulk mail, and also what's being caught up in an advanced threat or a virus, so actually carrying an active payload that they've identified. And as you can see, it tracks everything, so you can see what's going on. So you can always go back and release something, but you'll at least know whether it's been picked up as a potential. And you can see here, you can get reporting on also how popular your email domain is, how much is clean and how much is bulk, and what sort of amount of emails being rejected. So you get a lot of statistics as well, so you can see what's going on. And these often allow you to drill down by staff members, so you can see which staff members are getting a lot of email and which aren't, and including any addresses that you may have like info or things like that, so you can see what's coming through to those. So I'm going to hand over now to Matt, if Matt's ready to go, and we will talk about DNS filtering and phishing from WatchGuard's perspective.
Thank you, David. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen. It should be the presentation saying teach a man to fish, which is a great little expression that David actually fed to me earlier. So I thought I'd use that there. So welcome everyone. My name is Matthew C. I'm the manager for sales engineering in the APAC region for WatchGuard. And don't worry, it's not going to be a sales session. And of course there it is. All right. So what's a fish? I love that question. Well, it's not this sort of fish. We're talking about phishing with the PH on it. And I'm going to get to that in a moment. But I do like this fish. I love this fish. And David actually did mention about a IoT attack that used fish. And that was where a casino in the US was actually taken down by hackers because they used an IoT thermometer in the fish tank to hack into the casino network. So, I'm digressing a bit, but I love that little picture. So there you go. So why is it called phishing with a PH? Well, it all goes back to these things. So for the young'uns, this is an old style phone where you used to stick your finger in one of the holes on the dial and rotate it around to a stopper. Then you let go and wait for it to go all the way back. And then just start again with the next number one by one. It was very tedious and a slow progress. Anyway, I'm digressing again. So what is a phreak? And it relates back to phishing. Well, it all goes back to phone networks. Okay, back in the day when there were no mobile phones and making calls was a lot more expensive than it was today. In fact, in the US, they had multiple carrier networks. So it's not like here, we had Telstra. Over there, multiple carrier networks. So you could actually make a long distance call in the US, even if you were just calling someone over the road, because it might be going through multiple carriers. Now, to get around this back in the late 50s, some people started exploring the technology used in the phone networks to avoid having to pay for those long distance calls or even international calls. And these people were referred to as phreaks. Okay, but why phreaks and why the PH? Well, it's a combination of phone and phreaks, referring to the people who love to hack the phone systems. Okay, so now what has it got to do with this guy? Now, I'd love it if anyone actually knew who he is, but I'll tell you, that's Captain Crunch, and he sold cereal. Okay, now what the heck has this got to do with anything? Well, as it turns out, they had a small toy called the bosun's whistle that just happened to produce exactly the tone used for control signaling in the US phone networks. So this guy is John Draper, and he became known as Captain Crunch because he pioneered using that whistle for making free long-distance and international phone calls. Now, to make it easier, phreaks started making electronic versions of those tone generators, and they were called blue boxes. And that was a skill that John Draper actually taught to none other than Steve Wozniak of Apple fame. So Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were early phreaks and the makers of blue boxes. Now, one thing to point out here is that Draper, Wozniak, and Jobs were not doing this for profit. They were just engineers. They were doing it as an academic exercise. They were fascinated by how the phone networks were working and how these signaling systems worked. So they did actually get in trouble for wire fraud and things like that, but not enough to actually kill their careers, thank goodness. So phishing with the PH is actually used in reference to the original phone phreaks. So the term phishing was coined around 1995 and 96, and by hackers trying to steal America Online accounts and passwords. So you might remember seeing that term around there, AOL, all over the place in the early days of the internet. Now, to do this, they used email lures as hooks to phish for passwords and financial data from the sea of internet users. So software like AOL was the first automated tool publicly available for the purpose of phishing for passwords and credit cards. So today, phishing is just one of the biggest threats we face. And it's the easiest way for hackers to get past your defenses because they don't have to attack you directly. All they do is send out emails on bulk, and they just wait for a user to click on one of those links and effectively create the attack themselves. Okay, so here's an example of a typical generic one that I received asking me to sign some form of agreement. And it was directly addressed to me, but when I look at the email, it says just dear recipient. And so that was a pretty good giveaway anyway. And I wasn't really expecting anything. And I just had to hover over those links and to see, it was pretty quick to determine that was a fake. Well, spear phishing is where the attack is actually directly targeted at you. And that's where they go to LinkedIn or Facebook or, your company website. They learn about you. They craft an email that appears to come from someone that you know. So the case in point here actually was sent to one of my colleagues, and it was made to look like it came from our boss. Now, the recipient was smart enough to question, well, why is he getting an unsolicited offer from the boss? And, surely the boss would have spoken to him about this. And he hovered over the links, and again, it showed that it was fake. Fair enough. But, there are things like COVID-19 out now and the US election. So the spammers are jumping on those sort of things to make the spam more immediate, more relevant to what's happening in our environment. That means someone's more likely to click on those. So that brings us to the question of how to actually protect against phishing. So as David showed, there was one program that they used for cleaning out all those spam emails. Now, if you're using Office 365, I believe Microsoft do provide a level of spam protection, just like Google do. But you can use third-party solutions, as David showed. But we also have one. And this diagram here is very complicated, but all it's showing is just really there are multiple layers involved, just like all the defense layers you have in firewalls. There are multiple points in the chain here where we can look at that email and determine, hey, is this likely to be real email or likely to be spam? So there are things like reputation lists in there. There's a thing called the Sender Policy Framework, which is just gobbledygook about how email servers try and validate who's actually sending me this email. And DKIM is very similar to that, and DMARC. They're all trying to figure out, is this a legitimate company's email server? Is the email being sent actually legitimate? It's not being injected by someone else. And then we, all, of course, want to put it through AV engines and all those sort of things and look for all the other hints about, could it be a fake email? Things like David mentioned, the spelling mistakes or other little things inside there that just might tip the scale in this. Now, if an email does get through, then you should definitely look at things like DNS level filtering and protection. So DNS stands for Domain Name System. And that's how your PC, browser, or application converts a URL or a name into an actual IP address, which is how computers talk to each other. And it's sort of the computer version of how we used to use phone books to look up a person's phone number. So I know the name, I just need that number. Computers have the same thing, it's called Domain Name System. So things like our firewalls use DNS Watch, which is a service there that does this DNS filtering. And it's looking there to try and identify, is a link in the email legitimate or not? So if we know that it's linking off to a known phishing campaign or a dangerous website, we can filter those out. And of course, we do that on laptops as well. We're using a version called DNS Watch Go. Now, the important part of here is if a user clicks on one of those links, they're going to get redirected to a video, which is sort of in the moment training for them about how to spot phishing attacks. So it's going to teach them about those sort of things, whether it's on your phone or your laptop. Stop, think about the context, have a look at the email, hover over the links and think, is this actually meant for me? If, one of the best things you can do, if it claims to come from the boss or the finance director or somebody else asking for something, pick up the phone them directly and ask, did you send me an email? Are you asking for information or are you actually asking me to pay something? It's probably the best defense you've got. DNS Watch and DNS Watch Go also provide web filtering, which is another important step in there. So not only the DNS layer, which covers a link, but web filtering is about if I'm already going off reading my email in Gmail or something online and I click on a link inside there, it's not an email, I'm already online. We need to stop and inspect those web links and make sure that we're not going off to somewhere dangerous. So network firewalls also typically provide web filtering capabilities. And finally, probably the last line of defense here is virus and malware protection. So you should be using a firewall product with things like, in our case, up to 2 separate AV engines, and sandboxing, which is a way that we can look at an executable file, we can put it in a little sandbox, run it and find out, is this actually malicious or is it a legitimate program? Finally, we also have things like threat intelligence feeds, and that's where we can correlate information about what we see on the network and on the firewall with information we gather from around the world and from other people who tell us about threats. And on the endpoint, you should also be using protection, including DNS and web filtering, endpoint protection or antivirus, and some form of advanced endpoint detection and response capability for tracking live events on the endpoint. So the EDR piece is really where antivirus is today. So in the past, it used to use signatures, they used to use heuristics, which is about looking at a file. Has it been slightly changed to make it look different, but it's still the same thing, it's still a piece of malware. Endpoint detect and response is all about what's happening live on the endpoint. So it's tracking every process, looking for things like process injection, where it's trying to create a new event in your system. It's looking for things tampering on the file system, also tampering with registry if it's Windows. So EDR is going much beyond traditional antivirus solutions. So you do need to stop and think, what antivirus am I using? Does it provide EDR? If not, you should stop and think and start looking around for a new product. So there you go. That was very short and sweet. It wasn't a long presentation from me today. I really just wanted to have a little bit of fun. And I'll throw back to David.
It certainly does put across how important it is these days to have those multiple layers so that you are actually not relying on one thing, whether that be a person to protect you or or DNS filtering, or even just an AV product or EDR, that you do have all of those layers in place. I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways today for me anyway, is certainly looking at that and saying that you want to be able to ensure that you're protecting yourself from a number of different directions at the same time.